Hi, everybody. Thanks for delaying your trips to Disneyland to be here for this Friday evening track. As Sean said, I'm Harrison Rosenberg. I'm a soon-to-be graduating PhD student at UW-Madison. So if you have any job leads, let me know. And I'm here to talk about my work on the fairness properties of face recognition and obfuscation systems. So face recognition is pretty common. If you traveled internationally recently, or you even traveled internationally to come to this conference, you almost certainly encountered face recognition upon going through customs. You've probably seen it in stores. There's just, a lot of face recognition technology that's being spread out all throughout society now. And there's obviously privacy concerns that come with it. Your data is being collected. There's, chain of custody issues potentially. Companies seem to recognize this, like when Facebook shut down their face recognition system. But we were seeing kind of a cooling down in the amount of face recognition systems being deployed. But a recent study suggests that Americans think widespread facial recognition might be a good idea, so it's coming back, so we should still have these privacy concerns in mind. So what is face recognition? So face recognition intuition, essentially a face, cropped face, goes into an embedding function, typically some sort of deep neural network, metric embedding network. And embeddings, it's designed so that embeddings of the same person have low pairwise distance, and if you have different people, then embeddings should have higher pairwise distance. Okay, so now that we've talked about face recognition systems a little bit, I can talk about face obfuscation. So face obfuscation systems are intended to preserve privacy. So here's how they work. So let's say you start with an image of somebody, let's say Morgan Freeman, and you want to perturb his face. So you add a structured adversarial perturbation, where the perturbation is derived from methods like FGSM, similar to adversarial machine learning type methods. And so you add a structured perturbation. It's designed to target a particular person or not. And you've targeted Taylor Swift, and you've added the right perturbation, and now the face recognition system recognizes this face as Taylor Swift, even though the perturbation is visually imperceptible. So, and of course, the face detector is intended to operate normally, so a face is still detected. And so this is just kind of a diagram showing one work, but many of the face obfuscation literature, functions similarly, and other works you may have seen include Fox, Foggy Sight, and Low-Key. So, face obfuscation systems, there's been some hype around them. So is obfuscation fully achieved? The answer is no. So in this work, we showed that face obfuscation systems, they yield their own privacy incursions. So, and we focused on like test time perturbations. Privacy incursions that we studied relate to concepts in machine learning fairness. So we denote white, black, Asian, Indian used to categorize race, and the sexes we use are male and female, and the terminology that we use is consistent with leading works in face recognition and fairness. And we demonstrated our findings primarily experimentally. So how did we go about finding this? So here's the setup. We used LFW, labeled faces in the wild. It's got like a little bit less than 6,000 identities. Here's some images that appear in labeled faces in the wild. And the most important thing to note here is that these face recognition systems have absolutely no access to demographic information during training. So the methodology that we use is, we want to compare interdemographic versus intra-demographic performance when we do this kind of face verification comparison. I'll discuss that briefly in a little bit. So we do same demographic comparison, so that's the intra-demographic. So we have source target identities, and we want to see, does one, can we successfully target that target and successfully impersonate that? And then different demographic, so how hard is it to successfully impersonate somebody outside of that source demographic? And we evaluate performance on the FaceNet model. So how do we measure performance? So we use this well-studied notion of face embedding quality. It's basically a parameterized true positive rate. So the lower quantity is intended to be a threshold on the proportion of false accepts. So basically, given that you have this proportion of false accepts, how many correctly verified faces can you get? So how many are actually identified correctly? And this has been used in a lot of previous literature. And so here's the baseline that we were looking at. So how do face recognition systems in general perform just before we even modify or attack them? So we noticed that looking at the female demographic, for example, we see like it's easier to distinguish between identities when you're comparing across demographic groups than it is when you're comparing within demographic groups. That kind of suggests that face recognition systems are demographically aware, and that is, of course, without being trained on any demographic data. And so why is this? So we, part of looking at face obfuscation, face recognition, why is this? So we visualize the embedding spaces with TSNE, which is a nonlinear dimensionality reduction technique. And you can see here that distinct clusters appear with respect to demographics, and clusters are especially prominent when conditioning by sex. You can approximately draw a linear separator in this projected space. So that's to say that, if embeddings in the same demographic are clustered closer, then it should be easier to impersonate one another or easier to confuse the system. And indeed, that's true. So we studied how strong do perturbations need to be to successfully obfuscate a face. And so when you're perturbing within the same demographic, you need less strong of a perturbation than if you're perturbing to an identity outside of that same source demographic. And that's kind of explained by the TSNE that I just showed. And these discrepancies are actually statistically significant. So we found that to be interesting. And of course, there's differences between the individual demographics as well. Also statistically significant. So how do these rates kind of work with thresholds? When you vary the threshold that's used in that parameterized true positive rate, well, we see there's when looking at the race, conditioning by race, you could see that there's pretty significant disparities there in the obfuscation rate. And in most cases, the majority group has a higher success rate. So basically, the takeaway here is that it's really harder to protect the minority demographics privacy in the face of face recognition. We also looked at this conditioning by sex, and the discrepancy is smaller, but there still is a disparity there. We also, outside of the FaceNet setting, we also looked at commercially available APIs, and we saw that this phenomenon exists there too, where there's a disparate success rate when it comes to face obfuscation between different demographic groups. So we thought that was interesting. And so in summary, there's a relationship between the performance of face obfuscation systems and demographics. Consequentially, like face obfuscation systems leak demographic information, so that's a privacy incursion. And our paper includes theoretical intuition and further experimentation. And if you'd like to see more, you can check out the paper or visit the GitHub repo or check out our lab website.